It is the witching hour. Stop. When losses become wins, stop. And wins become losses, stop. Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hey, I'm Phil, and you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
I'm Kate. I've been writing software for over 10 years, but not the fun kind.
And I'm so super excited to be meeting with you too, just because we haven't done this in a while. We haven't had a proper recording, certainly for a proper episode, because we've been in the midst of Scandalous Game Summer. We did our live commentary of the 1994 Street Fighter movie and the 2020 film Monster Hunter. And so it's good to see you all again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to be talking about something other than Dave Grossman.
Amen.
Oh, yeah. Kate, don't mention that name. We might start talking about it again.
I know. I'm just waiting for you to mention Jack Thompson for some reason.
You just hear in the distance, it's the rustling of the woods. You just hear, ooh-ah, ooh-ah, ooh-ah. And I'm thinking of it like in Friday the 13th. Ooh-ah, ooh-ah. Anyway, yeah, so here we are. This is a pretty momentous recording right now because first, it marks the official end of Scandalous Game Summer. And with that, the official start of our third year doing the show. Holy crap, we've been doing this for 3 years now. Also, when it's all edited and put out on the feed, us talking right now, unless I messed up the math, this will be our 50th episode. And it'll also be, as Kate alluded to, the first episode we're doing after finishing our ungodly long 14-part series on the self-proclaimed killologist, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. And to mark all of those achievements, we're going to start a deep dive in what I hope will be a much overall lighter subject than the dude who spent the last 30 years railing against violent video games as murder simulators while simultaneously making tons of money teaching America's cops to kill. And again, check out our previous episodes for all of that. This time around, we're shifting our focus to a subject that is 100% definitely not problematic and completely devoid of any scandal whatsoever: college sports. Anybody here have any experience, maybe following college sports, maybe playing college sports? What are people's take on college sports?
I've been following peripherally for a while. I'm more of a pro sports person, so I follow college to the extent that it feeds into the pros. I also went to Drexel, which does not have a football team anymore and has a basketball team that talent-wise, well, I'll describe it this way. Most college basketball teams, their nemesis is UNC. Drexel's nemesis is UNC Wilmington.
What's that team name? Is that the 49ers? Am I thinking of? No, that's which was that?
The UNC Wilmington less Tar Heels.
Slightly cleaner heels. I'm looking up what their athletics. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, all that to say, so I know about some of the social aspects of college sports, and I watched the NCAA tournament because I love seeing adult children cry. But other than that, I'm not too into college sports.
What about you, Kate?
Yeah, I'm not really into college sports. I was never on a team. I don't really follow them personally, so I'm all ears to listen about this, but I don't have a lot of preconceived notions coming into this.
Okay. Well, first as an aside, UNC Wilmington's team name is the Seahawks.
The Seahawks.
So that's something for us to know. And that's always the fun. I know when you watch the men's and the women's basketball tournaments is you have these schools that come up and you've never heard of them before. When else do you think about Wofford or the Campbell Camels than during the NCAA tournament? I actually have a bit of experience with college sports. I've been following on and off. I've been following college sports for a good part of my life, going all the way back to when I was a kid. My dad was an alum at Rutgers, and he became a big college football fan out of that, big Rutgers football fan. And so since I was about 5 years old, up until I got to college, pretty much every year we went to homecoming games for Rutgers. When I finally went to Rutgers for undergraduate, I started following them more closely. I've always been a football fan. I follow the pros a lot. And then I started following college. And it just happened to be that when I was there was also that rare moment where Rutgers actually had a good football team, because they've been around for a long time, as we'll cover, and they were mostly trash. But they actually started getting pretty good. They went to a bowl game one year after I graduated. They went 9-0 at one point and were number 7 in the BCS rankings, to the point where Rutgers was actually, for a little while, a national championship contender. And then they immediately lost to an unranked Cincinnati team that I'm not still mad about. So I've been following college football for a long while. I've been getting back into it now with this series, actually. Followed a bit of college basketball, not as closely as football, but it's always fun watching a college basketball game. I got back into watching the men's basketball tournament this year. In preparation for this episode, I found on YouTube, I went down a rabbit hole where people just put up tons of old college sports games. So I was watching like vintage Rutgers football game. I was watching a couple days ago in between work stuff. I had it on like in the background. It was Rutgers, West Virginia from like 1984, which was wild to watch that. I've been to that stadium where they're at. It looks nothing like that now. And picking up a bunch of old vintage college football games. I also watched some of the more recent ones. I watched the Pac-12 championship not so long ago, the Big Ten championship, and the national championship. And so it's fun to watch. I have excitement watching college sports. And I may do it a little bit more now, having done more research on this. But yeah, so we're going to be diving into college sports. It seems pretty appropriate. I mean, it goes on July the 19th, 2024, Electronic Arts released EA Sports College Football 25 for the PS5 and Xbox Series S and X. Anybody here say a college sports or even just a general sports video game player?
No, I mean, certainly don't play the video games myself. I watch you play them sometimes, Kevin, and they seem to rally you up more than almost any other kind of game, so it's not really an advertisement for me.
The pain I put myself through, I do to myself. I just need to get better at adjusting sliders. What about you, Phil?
I played a version of Madden, I think 20 years ago. It was the one with Dante Culpepper on the cover.
2002.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Madden 2002, when John Madden was still alive. And I played that, and man, Madden is it is a super complicated game.
Yeah, I've played my share of Madden. I haven't played a new Madden in a long time, just because EA has, ever since they got that exclusive license in the early 2000s, I want to say 2005, they've really phoned it in on simulation football games. Every year they cut out features. There's a great YouTuber named Soft Drink TV who has been pretty vocal about the decline of Madden, put out like a 50-minute video where ran down all of the features that EA has cut out of Madden over the years as they've more aggressively focused on online play and Ultimate Team. Particularly, they've really been stripping down franchise mode. So if you're one who likes a simulation football thing, wants to do a franchise, there are significantly fewer features than there were, in the early 2000s. But I've been playing for a long time. The ones I've played the most of are Madden 07, NCAA Football 07 as well, and then on and off various other sports games. And kind of played them on and off. And yeah, it does rile me up because it's one of those games where, like, if I'm playing badly, I'm mad at myself because I feel like I should be playing better. But it's also frustrating for sports games because I feel like there are always so many adjustments you can make to make the game fun. A lot of it plays into difficulty sliders, and I'm not very good at setting them up, where I'll either be like completely dominating a team, like playing football and beating like 55-0 or something, or I'm losing like by 3 scores and throwing like 9 picks every game. I can't find the good balance, and that's what frustrates me. But going back to College Football 25, this is a real big deal when this game came out a few weeks ago. Developed by EA Orlando, EA Sports College Football 25 is a simulation football game based around American college football. Players can choose from 134 Division I schools or a created school through the Team Builder feature and take them through a dynasty, create a college prospect and play through their entire career, or spend real money opening digital card packs in College Ultimate Team, which is where EA gets a lot of their money. The pre-release hype for this game was massive. According to a July 19th, 2024 IGN article, 2.2 million people purchased the game during its early access period, paying $30 extra to get the chance to play the game 3 days early and experience the excitement and pageantry of college football with more bugs and fewer features than the full retail release. For example, several players shared images of the Dynasty mode menu during the early access period that showed nothing but lorem ipsum text.
Oh, no.
I don't blame the developers. I do blame their marketing and sales team.
We have 2 programmers on it. Does anyone want to explain what a lorem ipsum is in this situation and why this is a bad thing when you have a big budget release?
I'll make one statement on it. Well, lorem ipsum dolor sed amet, consectetur ad deep sea sing bellet, Am I right? Am I right, Kate?
Rim shot. Yeah. It's basically, yeah, it's filler text that looks a lot like written English. That is like the occurrence of vowels and consonants and the length of words and the lengths of sentences and punctuation and such like that. So I mean, if you go to lipsum.com, you can literally just generate however much lorem ipsum text that you want, because you might need text for any variety of reasons. I had to get some the other day because I needed to generate a document that was going to be like 100 pages of English text, and so I just generated a whole bunch of lorem ipsum. But at the end of the day, lorem ipsum is placeholder text. It's placeholder information. It's like click here to add content, essentially. So the fact that it was in the finished game makes the game probably feel unfinished. And like there wasn't necessarily a lot of time given to quality assurance. I would not personally blame developers or testers. Things like this don't just happen because of one or two people not pulling their weight or something like that. Like that speaks to a lot of trouble in the production of the game.
Can I add one more thing to that? I just wanted to reiterate this because it really does bear mentioning again. Consectator adipi sing elit. Am I right? Am I right, people?
What eldritch computer thing did we summon? We just summoned Clippy now. I hope you're happy.
Hey, it looks like you're writing a letter.
Hey,
So you're
making a podcast. Would you like to mention Dave Grossman?
Oh God, no!
It was no, Dave. Get no, back in the woods, Dave. Back in the woods, Dave.
Did somebody mention my name?
So yeah, it wasn't great seeing that. It did not speak to the quality that it was being released when people were paying again $100 to get this game 3 days early so they could see that stuff. That wasn't great. And I imagine our international and our non-sports fan listeners may come with us, who cares about this game? Why would anybody care about college sports to the point that millions of people would drop $100 for the privilege of playing an unfinished game 3 days early? However, college sports, especially football and basketball, are a capital B, capital D big deal in the United States. And how much of a big deal do you ask? According to a January the 10th, 2024 ESPN press release, 23.6 million viewers tuned in to watch the 2024 college football playoff, which is a set of 3 games that determine the college football national champion. And a combined 50 million people watched 2 of college football's high-profile postseason games, the Sugar Bowl and the Rose Bowl. Meanwhile, roughly 14.82 million people watched the 2024 men's basketball championship, and 18.7 million viewers watched the women's basketball championship. And this was the first year in history that the women's tournament beat out the men's tournament in terms of ratings. Several conferences have their own television networks, and at least one school, the University of Texas, has its own dedicated channel, the Longhorn Network. College sports are also a literal part of America's landscape. 13 of the 15 largest stadiums by capacity in the United States are college football stadiums. And 8 of those stadiums seat over 100,000 people, dwarfing the capacity of the largest pro football stadium, which is New Jersey's MetLife Stadium, which is the home of the New York Giants and the New York Jets, which only seats a paltry 82,500 people. In fact, 3 of the 5 largest stadiums in the world are American college football fields. Michigan Stadium at the University of Michigan, aka the Big House, Penn State University's Beaver Stadium, and Ohio State University's Ohio Stadium, aka the Horseshoe. So college football stadiums are in some cases some of the largest public gathering places in the world. College sports also generate a shit ton of money. Per a February 1st, 2024 Associated Press report, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or the NCAA, which is the governing body for American college sports, generated nearly $1.3 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars, during their 2022-23 fiscal year, with the majority of the money coming from media and marketing deals. On March the 19th, 2024, ESPN secured an exclusive media deal with the college football playoff through the 2031-32 season worth $7.8 billion. Licensed college merchandise, which is effectively, anything with a college brand stamped onto it, from your University of Michigan branded hoodie to your Ohio State University branded hat to your University of Pennsylvania branded underwear, is a roughly $4.6 billion industry. So it's a big deal money-wise too. And the people running high-profile college athletic programs, speaking of money, are multimillionaires. As of 2020, according to a report by 24/7 Wall Street, based on public records, a college football head coach was the highest paid state employee in 40 U.S. states.
I'm sorry, that is absurd.
It is really messed up.
I know, it's wild. It may be higher now because that's 2020 numbers.
Like, not only is that the case, most people are okay with that.
Many people think we should be paying them more.
Yeah, this isn't blowing the lid off of anything.
Yeah.
Must be nice.
Yeah, seriously. Must be really, really nice.
So one question about like this revenue. I know in the pros, and especially like with the NBA and their rights deal, they have to split the revenue between the players and the team owners. Like I think 50-50, like 50% of the revenue has to go after operating expenses, 50% of the revenue has to go to the players, and then 50% has to go to the team owners. And I guess it occurs to me that they're bringing in all this money, but there's no rights deal like that in college sports because the athletes don't really make any money, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a bit throughout the course of the series, but skipping ahead, for the majority of college sports history, things are changing now. The cut that the players got was zero. It was effectively zero. So those billions of dollars that I just mentioned, the TV deals, the licensing deals, none of that went to players. In fact, it was explicitly prohibited in NCAA rules for them to get anything, with the idea that the only compensation that they would largely get was the cost of attendance. And as we're going to talk about in a later episode, didn't even get complete cost of attendance either at the schools they go to. And effectively the privilege of going to a prestigious university, the chance to go to Michigan, the chance to go to Penn State, the chance to go to Notre Dame, chance to go to Stanford. Basically, that was their compensation. Meanwhile, again, the coaches that they play for are in some cases the most highly paid person in that state. And as the response to EA Sports College Bowl shows, the multi-billion-dollar empire that is college sports in America has also extended to video games. However, the game was highly anticipated among fans, not just because of that huge impact college sports has, but because it was the first college sports game in a long while. The last college football video game before this one was EA's NCAA Football 14, which came out just over 11 years to the day of College Football 25. Meanwhile, the last college basketball game was 2009's NCAA Basketball 10, and the last men's college baseball game was MVP 07. Both of those games were put out by EA. And what also makes the return to college football in the digital domain notable is that for a long time in the US, college sports video games were just a regular part of the annual release cycle. And between 1992 and 2013, there was at least one new title based on college football, men's baseball, or men's basketball put out every single year. So all that raises the question, how did we go from 21 years worth of college video games to none for over a decade? And to answer that, we're going to need to dissect the history of college athletics, not just as a sport, but as a brand empire and a media juggernaut.
Kevin,
what's up?
Can I ask one video game noob question? I think it's my responsibility. So, I know Madden exists back in the day. Apparently 22 years ago, I played a version of Madden, which blows my mind. So there's Madden and then there's college football. Why do there need to be two different versions? Or like, aren't they essentially the same game with different rosters? Like, couldn't you just bundle them into the same game? Or aren't they essentially the same game, whatever the version of Madden is for that year and whatever new features come out in that? Don't they just put those in NCAA football and change up the rosters?
I mean, that's a great question. One of the big criticisms going on right now as we're recording is people are complaining that it seems like college football 25 has just basically turned into Madden. It's just basically the same game with a college brand stuck on it. If I were to look at this from a meta standpoint, a lot of the argument for the appeal of college football, and we'll focus on college football for this, college football over pro football is a kind of experience of college sports, the pageantry, the traditions, things like going to a college football game and hearing the band strike up and hearing the fight songs and all the various kinds of, interesting traditions and the long rivalries. And a lot of the way it's been marketed, both as a brand, college football as a brand, but also when it comes to college football video games, is the kind of unique experience that is college football, and that college football has a distinct experience compared to the pros. I mean, you could make the argument that you could stick them all together and have one massive game, although I guess you could basically have, 32 NFL teams and about 140 colleges. Might get unwieldy, but that's for the programmers as they're trying to sort out lorem ipsum and all that stuff. But I think the larger argument is why they're distinct is because the experiences are presented as distinct.
I see. Will we get into why college sports is such a, like, to me, it seems like such an emotional connection and brand that it kind of short circuits the part of your brain that's logical about these things. America is a relatively young country as far as industrialized nations. When you think about provincialism and what you're allowed to be a provincialist about and traditions and us embracing our identity as like the world's police force, like the coincidence of all of those things is kind of college football. Like football originated with college football, and it's apparently some kind of proxy for the military. Like a couple of years ago when I was watching like one of the Super Bowl pregame shows, the announcer says, "And now for the traditional reading of the Declaration of Independence." I was like, what the fuck? They don't that's not a tradition. Like they don't even do this in like municipalities. Nobody traditionally reads the Declaration of Independence.
I mean, I think you allude to a really interesting point about college. There's a couple of things here that you can dissect. One is that there's a long history of connecting football with manliness and masculinity. A lot of the biggest boosters in the 19th century, we'll talk a little bit the early history of college football. A lot of the boosters talk about this idea of like, it's kind of the ultimate sign of American masculinity, strength and aggression on the fields, which will then carry over into, strength and aggression in the country. And that's always been kind of part of college football has always been martial. It's always been a kind of like warfare played out on a field. And even the people who talk about football will often use military kind of things. You think about the quarterback as the field general. You talk about the battles on the field and things like that. So what you're saying is definitely accurate. And it's only gotten more blatant and more obvious as the years have gone because the United States military has so much invested in football in general. And you see that a ton in the NFL. You want a really, really good example of this? I don't know if you follow the UFL. They're a spring football league. They were formed this year as a fusion of two other spring football leagues, the USFL and the XFL. XFL is kind of fun to watch. I like watching them. Go Defenders. Yay, Beer Snake. Anyway, the UFL had a really aggressive partnership with the Army. And if you watch a UFL game, they have tons of these segments where they'll talk to service members. So it's pretty obvious in that situation. We are trying to connect the excitement of football to, if you want to battle on the field or watch people battle on the field, you could battle abroad. Have your version of the brotherly shove on our enemies abroad. So yeah, I think what you're pointing out is very apt. And we'll see a little bit of that as we go, particularly when it comes to the idea of like masculinity in football.
Sorry, can I interject one other thing?
Sure.
One of the things I always found interesting about, when I was mentioning like the Declaration of Independence, something I looked into, I don't think up until recently, there was no law on the books at the federal, state, or local level anywhere in America that you were required to do the Pledge of Allegiance or sing the national anthem before a sporting event. But yet, every professional team in America does that. So, I mean, what that implies is that teams don't do it out of patriotism. Teams do it because people like it. So when you hear the national anthem before a game, it's for your entertainment. And that's one of the things that kind of makes my head explode when we talk about the intersection of nationalism and sports. And you think some of these things are about the nation, but you're really just being entertained. So what's happening here? Regardless, shut up and take my money.
And I'm proud to be an American. Yeah, it's fascinating. I know there are people who point out to the kind of quirkiness of American sports because you don't see that kind of stuff in other countries. As far as I know, like you're not, again, international is just correct. Like you're not going to a Man U game and hearing, God save the Queen or just God save the King now before a game. And like I was watching a little bit of a Phillies game today with my father-in-law, and the seventh inning, they stopped to play God Bless America in addition to the national anthem at the beginning of the game. So in some ways, American sporting is America. It's been tied in and roped into the identity of America itself. And a lot of what we're going to talk about in this episode is a little bit of that history because college football history is fascinating. It's really fun. I had fun researching this. And so with that, with talking about how long we had college football video games and how we haven't had them in a long time, we're also going to kind of need to look at the contested future of American college sports as an institution. So not just looking backward, but looking at where we're now. Because without giving too much away, despite expanding dramatically in terms of revenue and exposure, American college athletics have been in the midst of an existential crisis over the past decade. And much of that hinges on the role of people one could argue were most responsible for its success, the athletes themselves. And this is something you alluded to, Phil, is the question of what percentage of this massive billions of dollars of revenue that college sports generate, how much of that is going to the players? Well, for the most part, it was nothing. And while college sports have generated billions of dollars for the NCAA, schools, their coaches, and a host of corporations ranging from TV networks and streaming services to sneaker companies to video game publishers. For the overwhelming majority of the history of college sports, the percentage doled out to athletes, especially those playing the big money sports of football and men's basketball, has remained steady at zero. Supporters of that system asserted that players are student athletes who should receive no compensation aside from the chance of a college education. However, critics, including former supporters, legal experts, lawmakers, as well as current and former players, have mounted challenges to this system, and bolstered by a series of victories in the courts over the past 10 years, have begun to reshape the college sports landscape. And skipping ahead, a lot of that fundamental change in college sports over that time has been because of video games. And taking a closer look at the evolution of college sports in the United States from an extracurricular activity to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise will help us uncover why EA Sports College Football 25 was not just a return to digital college sports for the first time in 11 years, but a culmination of battles over the economics and ethics of college sports going back over 150 years. So today, we're going to go way, way back in the past. We're going to begin a deep dive in the history of college sports, and we'll trace it to its 19th century origins and explore how it evolved into the powerhouse it is today. Along the way, we'll learn how college sports inspired the creation of college sports video games and the ethical and legal battlegrounds of bringing one of America's most lucrative pastimes to the digital front. We'll also focus on what it has meant for the people who play those sports and how some of them used video games to fight the corporate systems behind college sports. It's going to be it's going to be a detailed topic. I anticipate we're going to be devoting roughly 4 months to this. So we'll also be able to cover it during the course of most of the college football season. And so what I'm hoping is during that we can kind of check in and talk about this. I know Phil and I have talked about this, maybe doing some check-ins on where we are in the state of maybe the college football and the pro football season. So stay tuned for some Scandalous Games sports chat. Welcome to Scandalous Sports Chat. Fred from Sayreville, I've got you on the line.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, how you doing? You're talking about college sports? Let me tell you something. About college sports. I've got this boil on my ass, and that has told me the entire story about these 2024 Philadelphia Eagles. Am I right? Kevin?
I'm Jerry from Doylestown, and I'll tell you that Jalen Hurts is going to throw 45,000 yards this season. But I still question his mental toughness. And yes, I do have a Blue Lives Matter sticker on the back of my car. What of it? Well, that's where I was on Jan 6. I was storming Andy Reid's house.
But I still got home in time for the game.
And so with that, I do warn you that this will be at times a harrowing look at exploitation and how colleges and corporations sacrifice the bodies and minds of young people, many of whom come from historically marginalized or excluded communities for our collective entertainment. However, this will also, on the other side of this, will be one of the wildest rides we've ever taken on this show. I hope that this won't just be like what we saw with Dave. We're talking about, people encouraging police violence. So there's going to be some fun highs and lows in this series.
I know I can't speak for everybody, but I could very happily spend an entire episode talking about the term student athlete.
And we're going to talk a bit about that. Dude, that has a history that needs talking about.
It is so fucked up and ingenious and insidious and lucrative. It's crazy.
The more you learn about that, the more you're going to be confirmed of that. Believe you me.
But I find it interesting also that we're talking about that they're basically doing this work in exchange for their education. Did I hear that right?
That's the push that the NCAA and its schools say, yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about that already, so I'm interested to talk more about that too.
So I'm hoping that with the ins and outs of the story, that even if you're not a sports fan, either a sports video game fan or sports in general, you'll come away with something. I think there's something for everybody here. Because what's really interesting about this too is that there's a lot of intersections also the way we talk about video games, particularly when it comes to things like licensing. So the licensing of real people is going to play a really big role, and it is a very complex history when it comes to video games. And along the way, you're going to get a cavalcade of incredibly weird stories and asides covering such disparate topics as Kurt Cobain, helicopter crashes, Central American dictators, and swamp dragons.
Will we talk about the Fab Five?
Which Fab Five?
The Michigan Fab Five.
Oh, I don't know about them.
So Jalen Rose does a whole thing about being an uncompensated student athlete. So there were five young men in the 80s or early 90s, actually, who were starting for the University of Michigan basketball team. And they were so transcendently talented, they were referred to as the Fab Five. So one of them was Jalen Rose, who grew up poor in Detroit. And his claim to fame is his mother invented the name Jalen. And half of all athletes in American pro sports today are named Jalen. And there's actually a very convincing argument that his mother, Mrs. Rose, was actually the person who came up with the name Jalen. So anyway,
That's amazing.
so they grew up poor. He's at Michigan. He's one of the Fab Five. And the University of Michigan is making millions and millions and millions of dollars off of the Fab Five. But them as student athletes, they're not allowed to receive any money or any financial assistance of any kind. So he's at a restaurant on campus and he like looks in the window and his jersey is for sale in the window and it's like $250. And then earlier in the day, he had gotten a call from his mother saying, listen, I just got this electric bill and I can't pay it. You're one of the Fab Five. You've got to figure out a way to help me pay for this bill. So he's sitting there thinking, like, my jersey is on sale in the window of the restaurant I'm in for more money than I can afford. And yet my mother can't pay her electric bill. Like, and they're making millions and millions and millions of dollars in revenue off of broadcasting the games that I'm in. He was just kind of like, what is happening here?
There are tons of examples of that. And a lot of critics of this go back to things like jersey sales. And I say that at the same time that I'm wearing a licensed college football jersey. I'm wearing again, grew up as a Rutgers football fan, still a Rutgers football fan. I am wearing the jersey of one of my favorite Rutgers players, named Brian Leonard. Brian Leonard was a fullback for Rutgers during the early 2000s. He was kind of part of that transition when they were terrible to when they were kind of pretty good to when they were amazing to when they eventually came back to being terrible again, and was a big deal for Rutgers for a little while as part of that transition. So he was number 23, and you could buy this jersey in the university bookstores. I didn't buy it at the university bookstores because it was too expensive. I bought this one on eBay, and he was one of those people who like would not see a nickel from that. And same thing with Jalen Rose. And there are lots of conversations with that. And if players did try to sell their memorabilia, their merchandise, things like game-worn jerseys, up until recently, they could be suspended for that. They could lose parts of their eligibility, if not their whole eligibility. And there's a lot of examples of stuff like that. There's Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, when he played for Georgia, got suspended a couple of games. Johnny Manziel, he got suspended for half a game for selling autographed merchandise. So those do happen. And the things people point out is like, well, while I'm trying to sell this thing for various reasons, like, a lot of these people are coming from poor communities and trying to help out their families and stuff like that. At the same point, you could go into the bookstore and buy them for, $100 and they don't see anything from that. And so we're going to talk about that. But before we go into that specifically, we're going to take things all the way back to the origins of college sports in the United States. We're going right back to the beginning. It's the furthest back we've ever done on the show. So the earliest collegiate sports programs in the U.S. date to the 1840s. And the earliest intercollegiate competitions, that is competitive sporting events between different colleges against each other, date to the 1850s. One of the earliest notable intercollegiate contests was the Harvard-Yale Regatta, a 2-mile rowing competition held on New Hampshire's Lake Winnipesaukee on August the 3rd, 1852. Spectators and judges, one of whom was then U.S. presidential candidate and future 14th president of the United States, Franklin Pierce, watched the Harvard rowing team defeat Yale by 4 lengths. In addition to inaugurating what would go on to be an annual battle for bragging rights between the Crimson and the Bulldogs, the 1852 Harvard-Yale Regatta also established 2 other storied traditions in college sports, namely corporate money and cheating. The competition came courtesy of the B&C Montreal Railroad Company, who paid Harvard and Yale's rowers with a 2-week all-expenses-paid vacation. On top of that, not all of the so-called student athletes competing in the regatta were strictly what you'd call students, with several professional rowers brought on as ringers for both teams. So this has literally been happening from the very beginning.
And that was in the 1840s?
1852.
Wow. And were they on HGH too?
What was the 1852 equivalent of HGH?
Opium?
Yeah, probably on opium. Just hopped up on laudanum. They're just injecting cocaine directly into their eyeballs at that point because it's just a good mental stimulant.
Ugh.
Need a pep in your step?
Try this, son. Cocaine. That'll get you on the trolley.
This will give you the vigor to beat those Harvard men. However, when we're talking about the power of college sports in the United States, we need to shift our focus to football because football was and is the driving force behind the current state of college athletics as a multi-billion-dollar brand. It is football that got us here. On November the 6th, 1869, in New Brunswick, New Jersey, Rutgers defeated in-state rival the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton University, 6-4 in what the NCAA recognizes as the first intercollegiate football game. To this day, the State University of New Jersey, and this humble historian's undergraduate alma mater, markets itself as the birthplace of college football, and has, in my opinion, the absolute nerve to claim that their win over Princeton in 1869 constitutes a national championship. The ultimate participation trophy.
Thus says the podcast that was nominated for a Pulitzer.
2 Pulitzers.
2 Pulitzers.
Football's popularity on American campuses grew by leaps and bounds through the end of the 19th century, to the point that it became a growing source of anxiety in terms that will sound pretty familiar to modern audiences. On the one hand, college faculty and administrators lamented the growing commercialization of the sport and expressed concerns that the pursuit of that sweet ticket revenue was drawing focus away from their institution's lofty goals of providing a quality education to America's wealthy leisure class who possess the means to not spend 20-hour days working in the factories, farms, or mines. For example, Francis Amasa Walker, the president of MIT from 1881 to 1897, once opined that, quote, if the movement toward athletics shall continue at the same rate, it will soon be fairly a question whether the letters BA stand more for Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Athletics, end quote. On the other hand, as should be expected in a sport where dudes hit each other at full force with no protective gear, save maybe for a Letterman's jacket and a healthy dose of American exceptionalism, people at the time also thought football was kind of dangerous, raising concerns that something must be done to reduce football's omnipresent risk of serious injury or death. And few maneuvers epitomize the hazards of late 19th century American football than the infamous flying wedge. Now, Phil, I know you're a big-time football fan. Do you know the flying wedge?
You know what? I don't, but I assume it's where people get into a duck flying V and then just, I don't know, try to go traipsing down the field.
What about you, Kate? What do you think? If someone told you a move was called the flying wedge.
Flying wedge. I feel like it would be sort of a group effort to alienate one person from another.
1850s cyberbullying here.
What would that even look like?
Telegram. We're sending abusive messages over telegraph wire.
Can I make one more guess?
Go for it.
The quarterback drops back to pass, and then you realize that they're not throwing a football, they're throwing a head of lettuce. Is that the flying wedge?
That's called the iceberg maneuver. That's for another day. We're not talking about that today. But your first observation, Bill, is pretty close. That's basically with the flying wedge. So arguably one of the most dangerous plays in the history of the sport. The flying wedge involved 10 of the 11 players on the side with the ball lining up on the field in a V-shaped pattern, targeting one of the opposing team's players and hitting them with all of the fury 10 burly college kids could muster while the guy with the ball broke for a big gain amidst the ensuing chaos.
I mean, that could get somebody killed.
Did it get somebody killed?
It's hard to say in the 19th century because so many things were very dangerous.
Right, but do we have some sort of evidence that it killed someone?
I will say I don't have a specific death toll for the flying wedge in particular, but in a minute we're going to talk about the death toll of football at this time. So I can't say that it's not responsible for deaths.
Is this like Lou Gehrig's disease? Is the person who was killed like Justin F. Wedge?
Oh, look, it's named after him.
I mean, sure.
wedge disease. Yeah, I had the terminal illness of being hit by 10 guys on the football field.
Some would say that having been hit by 10 men on a football field, that I've caught a bad break.
There's a statue devoted to Augustus Percival Wedge, and he's just flat. He's just like a cartoon character flattened out. All right, the flying wedge. This is one of my favorite parts of this, and I know we're just started this. Developed by Harvard head football coach Lauren F. Dillon and inspired by Napoleonic warfare tactics, the Crimson first unveiled the flying wedge at the start of the second half of their annual end-of-season game against rival Yale, held on November the 19th, 1892. During the second half kickoff, as Harvard freshman halfback Art Brewer fielded the ball, the rest of the Crimson line locked arms and formed a wedge in front of him and directed their collective fury against Yale player Alex Wallace, hitting him at full speed and allowing Brewer to break for a 20-yard gain. The play stunned the rival Bulldogs and sent shockwaves through the college football world. According to Scott A. McQuilkin and Ronald A. Smith, in a 1993 article for the Journal of Sport History on the history of the flying wedge, quote, as Brewer had gained 20 yards over Wallace's position in the deceived Yale team, the play was successful. But the concept of 10 men in motion colliding at full speed with a single defender was an omen of even greater success. It was a play, read a Boston Herald account, that sent the football men who were spectators into raptures. Amos Alonzo Stagg, who had just taken the football coaching position he would make famous at the University of Chicago, included the play in his new book on scientific football the following year and called the play the most spectacular single formation ever. Park Davis, a contemporary football player from Princeton and an early football historian, believed that no play has ever been devised so spectacular and sensational as the flying wedge. What a grand play, wrote the New York Times. A half a ton of bone and muscle coming into collision with a man weighing 160 or 170 pounds. Yet the Times warned, a surgeon is called upon to attend the wounded player, and the game continues with renewed brutality, end quote.
So what happened to that person?
I don't know.
Oh my God.
He was embedded in the ground.
So as you were reading that, something that started to occur to me is, when you read about stuff like this in the press, and, this is probably like the game in America at that time, or maybe besides baseball, you think about how many kids at home are probably enthralled with the idea of football and playing football in their backyards. So even from a year like 1892, you can say it's inevitable that there would be like a video game version of this, that like reproducing the theatrics of this at home and reliving the experience, trying to think of yourself as one of these people is probably like predestined.
I could certainly see that. And this is also this is beginning the rise of American professional sports. I want to say the National League was founded in 1883, I think. So we're talking about baseball, and the American League was in 1895.
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief correction to this part, because I got the dates wrong on both the American League and the National League. So citing baseballreference.com for this, the National League was first formed in 1876. Meanwhile, the American League originally came out of a minor league called the Western League, which was first formed in 1894, which was then reorganized in 1900 and held its first season as the American League in 1901. So apologies to my baseball fans out there, and back to the show.
And during the time, you're seeing a lot of these sort of barnstorming professional sports groups and amateur sports groups. And for football, the way people experience football at this time is college. Collegiate football is what the NFL would be, what is now, and incidentally also what college football is now. And yeah, I could see a lot of people reading these reports of excitement. Can you imagine the people reading the reports about the flying wedge? It's that's got to be fun to watch. And of course, people going to the games to see them if you can.
I mean, this is before cable, so
a couple of years before it, yeah. Again, they're listening to this over the telegraph cable, over Morse code. Player crushed, 20-yard gain, stop.
I'm sorry, I was just thinking about what NFL Sunday Ticket was like in 1892. All right, let's tune in. Holy shit, that was amazing.
I can imagine it's like, okay, it is the witching hour, stop. When losses become wins, stop. And wins become losses, stop. So the flying wedge, it's kind of a big deal when Harvard breaks this out against Yale. And bolstered by Harvard's success, the flying wedge quickly became the brotherly shove of the 1893 college football season, with numerous other programs rolling out their own versions, countermeasures, and even fake-out versions of the wedge to keep opponents off balance. This kind of shaped college football in 1893. And the literal and figurative impact of the flying wedge inspired one New York Times reporter to joke in an October the 1st, 1893 article, quote, quote. Every wind that blows from the east will bring us the sound of cracking arms and also ribs. We shall learn that center rush has lost 30 pounds in 3 days and is going into a decline. That right guard's ears have been sewed on just for this occasion and are likely to fall off at any moment, leaving him unable to hear the signals. That left tackle is playing with a wooden leg. That right end has heart disease. That quarterback's arms have both been broken and have not knit yet. That one of the halfbacks cannot see, and that fullback has water on his kicking knee, end quote.
America really wants to follow a brutal sport at this point in its history. I wonder how much of that is about, like the Civil War.
Well, America hadn't been aside from the wars in the West with indigenous communities, they hadn't been in a proper war in about 30 years. And I guess they're getting the war itch. Because, a couple years after this, they go to war with Spain, about 5 years after this. So they're trying to find that brutality somewhere.
Well, I mean, were there other forms of popular entertainment at this time, particularly in sports, that were embraced to a large volume, but that didn't feature this much promise of like brutal injury and bloodshed?
Huh. I mean, I guess there's
right.
Baseball could be pretty rough too.
Well, I mean, but was it that rough?
No.
Like what you just said? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not generally hitting somebody in baseball. I guess unless they cyberbullied you via telegraph or something.
Like, do you think this maybe was the emphasis on violence in football being less about scratching some sort of an itch, so as I heard, and more like, wow, I've never seen something like this that's just allowed to happen and be fun, and woo, let's look at like, wow, this is incredible. I can't believe I'm allowed to watch this,
It could be that too. People love spectacle. They've always loved spectacle. And there's excitement. I mean, I say all these things about football and I still watch it. I'm wearing a football jersey right now. I will watch the Eagles this year. Like I acknowledge it's a problematic fade for me. I acknowledge how brutal and rough this sport is and what it does to people's bodies. But I also will tune in and watch the Eagles, blow out the Cowboys by 40 points because I think that's fun to watch. So I guess I can definitely see the appeal. And as much as I'll be complaining about this sport, I'm definitely someone who is also, watching this.
Yeah, I fully admit to being one of the facilitators of the problem. I also think counterintuitively that they should get rid of all the protective gear and the sport would be a lot safer.
It's funny you mention that because I have heard that argument that there's some people believe that with the development of protective gear like pads and especially helmets, that seemed to give players a belief that they were more protected and so they would hit harder. So there is a rationale to that if players were playing like they did in the 1890s where they don't have any protective gear at all, that they're probably going to be a lot more careful about how they go for hits. Or you're not going to see like someone going for what Ndamukong Suh got very well known for when he was an NFL player, that was the dirtiest players I've ever seen, like deliberately going for blows to the head and things like that. You probably wouldn't see that if he had to without a helmet on. So people have made that argument. But yeah, so the flying wedge kind of a big deal. And people are acknowledging that, wow, this is a very, very effective play, but it's also a very, very brutal play. And it's going to get some people really seriously hurt. And the chaos inspired by the flying wedge eventually prompted college officials, led by former Yale head coach Walter Camp, to outlaw the maneuver in 1894. And Camp, really, really influential at the time in developing the rules of college football. However, even with the demise of the flying wedge, football's safety remained a persistent topic of concern through the late 19th and early 20th centuries as college officials, politicians, and progressive activists lobbied to make football safer, if not eliminate the sport entirely. For example, on October the 9th, 1905, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt hosted several college football coaches and alumni leaders and advocated for reform. Concern over football reached a fever pitch at the end of the 1905 season when several newspapers reported football had been responsible. And you were bringing up what kind of death toll was for football, Kate. This is where that comes in. At the end of the 1905 season, when several newspapers reported football had been responsible for at least 168 serious injuries and 25 deaths that season, a gridiron-related death toll, the editors of the San Francisco Call warned President Roosevelt in a November 26, 1905 open letter was double the average from the previous 5 years combined. And that's not even including, I would say, probably stuff that we could not directly connect it to football. Like they don't know what CTE is in 1905. So it's possible that that death toll is a lot higher, but they're like, I believe these are when they're talking about on the field severe injuries, ones that they're witnessing in real time. A guy cracks his skull on a flying wedge and doesn't wake up kind of thing. I think that's what they're talking about here. Football's toll on its players led another newspaper to declare, quote, the once athletic sport has degenerated into a contest that for brutality is little better than the gladiatorial combats in the arena in ancient Rome, end quote. And on December the 3rd, 1905, the Cincinnati Commercial Times printed an, in my opinion, absolutely incredible political cartoon depicting the Grim Reaper sitting atop a goalpost overlooking a pile of dead football players with the caption, the Grim Reaper smiles on the goalposts.
Wow. You could run that today.
Yeah.
It's funny you mention that because there was a Time magazine article, I want to say from 2014, that was basically that. A headline after a high school player died, the headline was, is football worth it? So as Mark Twain allegedly said, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And over the next several months in 1905, debate over the safety of college football swept across campuses, with some university officials and faculty calling for reforms, while others demanded football's outright expulsion from college athletics. For example, the dean of the Divinity School at the University of Chicago, and University of Chicago was a big football program in those days, declared in a December 1905 speech that football was, quote, a boy-killing, education-prostituting, gladiatorial sport, end quote. And several of the school's professors refused to allow students to play unless, quote, the moral and physical evils, end quote, of the sport could be rehabilitated. In response, both Columbia University and the University of Wisconsin banned college football. And for a time, Stanford University and the University of California each replaced football with a notably safer sport, rugby.
Rugby is kind of safer, though.
Well, probably for the reasons we just talked about, too, because you are doing this without padding.
Yeah.
So I think there's a certain level of self-preservation when you play rugby. And I mean, I don't watch it too much, but it's a lot more scrumming and pitching than whereas football, it's like line up on opposite sides and big guys are just hitting each other on every play. I heard a thing about like they're talking about CTE is like a lineman, an offensive or defensive lineman is basically getting a blow to the head on every play. And I feel like that might not be as much of it. I'm from a total neophyte rugby person that I could see that being an issue with today's football.
Yeah, agreed.
Eventually, several university presidents came together and coordinated with the White House to develop and implement rule changes to help make the sport safer. And if those changes also took a competitive edge away from Yale's Walter Camp, then it was all the better. I will point out that Teddy Roosevelt was both a football fan and a Harvard alum. Among the numerous rule changes implemented were the creation of key elements of the sport that remain in place to this day, such as the line of scrimmage and the forward pass. And the panic over football also led to the creation of a national regulatory body to manage college athletics, initially called the Intercollegiate Athletic Association, or the IAA. However, in 1910, the IAA was renamed the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or the NCAA.
Wow, that was 1910?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that establishes where we're going to go from here. When we talk about the big prominence of college sports, the NCAA comes out of this panic over football.
And now with the founding of the NCAA, we have the foundation set to talk about how college sports became a big business in the United States. So we're going to wrap up right here and we'll pick up this conversation next time. But before we do that, Phil, I think you had some news you wanted to share, maybe about a new project that you and Andy are working on. So you want to share some about that?
I don't know what the cross section is of people who learn about video game history and people who watch the 90s CGI cartoon Beast Wars, but two regular contributors to this podcast, Andy and myself, are doing a Rewatchables podcast about that 90s CGI cartoon Beast Wars, and it's called So We Were Talking About Beast Wars. If that's an interest of yours, and you want to hear two comedians barely talk about the plot of the episode and mostly make a bunch of jokes, tune in.
I've been listening because I'm part of that Venn diagram of people who listen to the show, not because I'm making the show, but also who watch Beast Wars. And I can't wait to hear more about the continuing adventures of Aptimus.
Somebody mentioned Aptimus. So the other night, I was watching this movie on this drama channel, and I didn't think it was going to be about apes, but it turned out it was. But instead of being about an ape, that it started some kind of fish man. It was so confusing. It was called the Ape of Water. Well, let me tell you something. Fish man isn't the king of the ocean. Aptimus is the king of the ocean, and I will never receive my comeuppance.
I feel like Aptimus would call into a sports radio station and have some strong, very, very varied opinions about things.
when are we going to get one of these bowl games sponsored by Bananas?
And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.
And be sure to check out So We Were Talking About Beast Wars.
Thank you very much.